Hello, St. Anne Parish, and welcome to this week's Quick Things, which includes some important announcements, including some pieces of good news, and then what I think will be an interesting conversation as well, which kind of builds on one of the pieces of good news. Our first big announcement of good news is that after our initial effort, our fall follow-up, and our Christmas wrap-up, and every other gimmicky name we could think of, we have met our target for the Inspired by the Spirit campaign. So this is a combined parish diocesan effort that we began back in March or April, kind of took the summer off, and then have renewed some encouragement through the fall, and now have met our target. Our target was $905,000. We have pledges and contributions of $925, almost $926,000. So about 102, 103% of our target, which is great. And so thanks to everyone who has pledged and contributed to help that cause. The 65% of the funds stay in the parish. A big part of that goes to to cover remaining costs of our renovation, to pay off some existing debt, as well as to add some funds to our St. Anne endowment. So thank you very much to the 234 families or couples, individuals who made those pledges and contributions. That number, I'll be honest, is a bit disappointing. We have 950, almost 1,000 families. And so that we would have had a better participation, $10, $20, whatever, is a bit frustrating. And contrary a bit to our Building Our Future campaign, which was initiated before I got here, I kind of came in on the tail end, a couple of years remaining of paying for that campaign and those pledges. That brought in $1.2 million from 366 parishioners. So we were about 100 fewer participants in this last campaign. But the other reality is that to do two capital campaigns, almost back to back in close proximity, that's a pretty big ask. And so regardless of who contributed or how many, we're glad to report that we have met our target. And I will stop talking about Inspired by the Spirit at Mass on Sunday. And thanks to those people who've made it possible that I can stop talking about Inspired by the Spirit. One of the things that was asked at our Finance Council meeting last week when I shared this news, the people said, so are we one of the first parishes to meet their target? Oh, not at all. I mean, many of the parishes were done in May, early June. Holy Name, St. Mark's and Rothschild here in Wausau, those parishes were done, I think. St. Matthew's came pretty close to their target. I'm not sure if they met their target or not, but lots of other parishes across the diocese not only have met their targets, but have gone way beyond what their target was. Many of those parishes, though, hadn't had campaigns in years and maybe had bigger needs to respond to. So it's not good to compare. We're not in competition with one another. The next big announcement is that fish fry signups have begun. As you have maybe already heard, fish fries are back this year. I think it's our 66th or 67th year here at St. Anne of having fish fries during Lent. The first one will be Friday, February 24th. But the reality is that we need about 100 people to help make that happen each Friday. And so the sign up for fish fry is a link to the sign up is in the Quick Things email. You'll also find a link at the fish fry page on the website, stannwausau.org. A link to that is in the email as well. We'll also have pen and paper sign up at church on Sunday, but if you're watching this video, you can really sign up much more easily online. So please check that out. The sooner we get those slots filled, the easier it is for the leadership team, our fellow parishioners who then don't have to worry about, kind of at the last minute trying to find people to do various things. There's going to be a blood drive coming up here at St. Anne's on Monday, February 20th. Sign up for that has begun or is underway. We had a blood drive, I want to say maybe a year ago or so. And by the time we learned of it, all the slots were already filled. So a lot of St. Anne parishioners were able to give blood here. But we're giving you advance notice, information on how to register to give blood at that blood drive in McKillop Hall on February 20th. It's a Monday, is in the Quick Things email. On Friday, the folks at Mount Sinai Congregation are inviting us and the rest of the Wausau community to a community Shabbat. This is their worship that occurs on Friday as they anticipate the Sabbath, the seventh day of the week, the day the Lord rested. And that's at 7 o'clock on Friday at Mount Sinai Congregation. It's at 910 West Randolph Street. I'll have information in the Quick Things email about that as well. A great opportunity to experience a different, to experience the Jewish tradition and what happens as they come to worship. So the ritual, and then some time for conversation and question and answer as well. It's also Holocaust Remembrance Day. And so our participation in this community Shabbat would be a way to acknowledge that as well. And also, as there's been kind of an unfortunate uptick in anti-Semitic violence and language and things across the world, really, this would be a good way to show our encouragement, our cooperation with Mount Sinai Congregation and the members of that community. Let's see. Oh, Super Bowl Sunday is coming up on February 12th. The NFL is still figuring out who will play in the Super Bowl. And our neighbors at Mary Mother of Good Help Parish, the Hmong Parish, are planning to make egg rolls and spring rolls to sell on that day. They call it their Super Roll Sunday because they can't use the name Super Bowl because the NFL won't let them, or they would sue them. I can use the word Super Bowl because I'm not part of that event. But anyway, they would love you to order some spring rolls and egg rolls, and the sign up link is in the Quick Things email. And there are paper order forms in the entranceway at church. The last big announcement is this award that St. Anne's didn't get. I got to actually receive the award, but the award is not for us. But it was presented last Thursday in Wisconsin Dells by the Wisconsin Association of Builders and Contractors. And it was presented to Ellis Construction. It's called their Project of Distinction Award. This was a gold award. So there's gold, silver, and honorable mention. And this was in the renovation category for the work that Ellis did in designing and renovating our church. They gave a great presentation. A couple people came up to me afterwards and commented on what a beautiful church we have. Well, it really is to the creativity and the labor of Ellis Construction. So they asked me to receive the award. There were Ellis people there as well. And Doug Holmberg of our parish, who was kind of our parish liaison with them on a regular basis, and Doug's wife Cease were there as well. So and we get to keep this. I'm not sure where we'll put it. If anyone has any ideas, let me know. But what a great honor for them. And actually, we were just one of three. They were also recognized for the Delta Dental headquarters in Stevens Point, which is a beautiful building. You see it as you're going south on I-39. And also one of the, Bone and Joint Clinic, I don't have the name correct here in Wausau, but a new building that they were recognized. And those were all gold or silver awards as well. So Ellis had a big night at that event in Wisconsin Dells, but a great kind of treat to be honored in that way. And I was not honored. I was just kind of along for the ride, but need to have our project get that recognition, which leads into our conversation today at long last. Pat Pillard is with us and he's wondering, am I ever going to get to talk? Because Father Tom just keeps talking. But Pat, this is kind of for you too, because, Ellis gave us the shell, but we had to put stuff in there. And I think what you've allowed us to put within the walls and on the floor and to furnish our church is part of maybe why this was awarded as well, because your pieces were in all the pictures that the judges saw. So Pat is the person who has crafted, I'm going to go through the list, Pat, of what you made. I think I've got them all. Let me know if I'm missing anything.
I will.
Altar, the ambo, the wooden cross behind the corpus. So Ellis made the kind of the larger cross shape, but then Pat made the cross that goes over that, and then the corpus is attached to the cross he made. The processional cross, credence table, the presider's chair, and then the two adjoining chairs for the deacon or concelebrants, the tabernacle table, the ambry, which is the most recent addition, which is one of the new things I said in last week's quick things. There's something new in church, and that is the ambry. And we'll talk maybe about that in a minute. Also, the book stand at the presider's chair, which Pat made as he wasn't asked to make that. That he did on his own, or I think Sue, his wife, suggested that would be a good thing. We'll talk. Sue had a role in all this too. We'll get to that. So those are just, those are such beautiful pieces, and we've had so many positive comments. And so I think this award goes to Pat as well for his work. So first of all, Pat, thank you beyond words in terms of what you have contributed to our project. It's a privilege to stand and pray around that altar every day, and I marvel, that it came from your hands, that we have that privilege. First of all, tell me, Pat, how did you learn to do this?
I've always been interested in woodworking, and it's really a hobby, although sometimes it doesn't seem like a hobby anymore. But I had an interest as a kid, always putzing with wood, trying to make things. And then upon graduating high school, I went to work for my Uncle Ted Prosser, building houses for a couple of years before I went into the Navy. And so a lot of the skills I developed were the result of that experience with my Uncle Ted. But it's just something I've always enjoyed doing, and have built a number of pieces over the years and still enjoy it.
Great, great. And why were you willing to do this work for us?
That's an interesting story, but I have a very dear friend who acquired somehow a number of stained glass pieces from a church she grew up in. And when Mary got those pieces, she asked me to frame them. And unbeknownst to me, Mary is a relative of Father Tom. And so when Father Tom was over for dinner at their house one night, I guess he noticed the stained glass pieces and asked who did them. And that led to you asking me if I'd be willing to. Initially, it was going to be an altar. And so I was flattered and honored to be asked.
It was initially.
Yeah, but it's my privilege. I'm really, really pleased with the way all the pieces turned out, and it was a very interesting project, and I've enjoyed it.
So tell us about in terms of the altar, because that was the first piece, but then of course the ambo being the piece from which the scripture is proclaimed. The altar and ambo are the primary pieces, and the design for those came from. We had a group that made a field trip to Eau Claire to see a couple, visit a couple of churches there where there were pieces that I thought were worth trying to replicate. I don't want to say we stole the design, but the main one I wanted to look at was at Newman Parish in Eau Claire, because I had been associated with that parish, and just always thought their altar was well sized, but also beautiful in an important way. And that's really what we kind of designed ours after, Pat, correct?
Yes, yep. The uniqueness of that altar was the bronze castings that were placed on the face of the altar. So as you look at it from the seating area in church, there was a number of bronze castings with stained glass in the back. And unfortunately, I could not find a source for those bronze castings. And so I crafted a piece out of wood with that depth perception, creating that depth perception, and ran it by you. And you agreed that might be a good way to replicate that particular feature on the altar. So
how many of those little pieces did you make, Pat?
Well, with the ambry that we just put up last week, I think the number is close to 50.
And how much time does it take to make each one of those things?
Well, it's a process. So whenever I was into the project and had to create a number of them to finish that particular piece, I did them as kind of a process. So it's I'd be guessing 3 or 4 hours for each set.
And I don't know if everyone knows this, Pat, but what's in the center of those pieces?
It's a piece of stained glass that was taken, remnants from one of the remodeling projects at St. Anne's a number of years ago,
right?
As I understand it.
Yeah, so they were in storage, and we came upon them, or Tim Hollis, our maintenance director, came on them and said, I don't know if you're in the project, if they have any use for these. And so they were great. In the altar at Newman and Eau Claire, there was a similar stained glass piece, but it didn't have the significance that ours do, in that they come from the windows that we have in the church. And actually, Pat, I don't know if I haven't told you this, but last week, someone on their way out of Mass she said, for the first time, I saw light shining through those glass pieces. So the sun was shining. First of all, the sun was shining. That's remarkable in itself, but it was shining at just the right angle that it kind of reflected off something or whatever. And so that was kind of neat to hear. Just another thing about the altar, and I've mentioned this before, but the altar at Newman and Eau Claire that we kind of used as our model was designed and built by George Hagel, who is an art professor at UW Eau Claire, who I knew. He's since deceased. But he designed and built the altar and ambo and presider's chair that we had in our most recent church, the 1986 renovation. So I think it's kind of neat that, well, we certainly have a very different ambo and chair and altar than we had before. It really has its origins in George and his design and his work. Tell us about the wood that you used, Pat, for these pieces.
Well, we really didn't have any specific wood in mind when we started the conversation, but I've always enjoyed working with black walnut. It's just the character of black walnut is kind of unique, because while most of the material is very dark in color, as you look at the pieces on the altar, there's a lighter shade to some of the pieces, and that to me just creates the uniqueness of black walnut. But it's a completely natural finish. So all I did to finish the pieces was to put a polyacrylic finish over them. And the other unique thing about black walnut is, as it ages, it will get darker. So it's that dark. I really like the dark character of the wood itself.
Does the darkness, is that intensified by light at all, or just time?
It's just time.
So that's kind of neat too, is that these are, in a way, they're living or evolving pieces in terms of how that natural material, the wood, will change as time goes on. And that's been something that some folks have commented on too, that it's not something you see everywhere. It's rather distinctive to have, for example, an altar made of black walnut and not oak or something like that. Is there anything more difficult working with that wood as opposed to others, or?
No, it's a relatively easy, stable wood to work with. Shaping and cutting, it's fairly easy. The most challenging piece to the altar and the tables in the ambo was the figuring out how to attach the legs to make them sturdy enough, understanding that over time those pieces will be moved around a fair amount. And so each of those legs is a 6x6 hollow core piece, but the way they're fastened to the top on each of the pieces is something I had to come up with that's unique to those pieces, and it's different from the altar we looked at over at the Newman Center. So.
And how are they attached?
It's a little difficult to explain, but there's a substructure under each of the pieces that the legs sit against, and then they're bolted, and they're not going to go anywhere. That's for sure. But
well, and the idea, the ambo and altar are supposed to be permanent. So Yeah, they probably will get moved slightly depending on if, let's just say there's going to be a concert in the church, but they're not intended to be moved because of the significance of them. They should stay where they're at. Sure. Chairs were something new for you, though.
I'd never made a chair before.
And what is
I'd never made an altar either, though.
Well, true, you hadn't. But you had made cabinets and tables and things, right?
Right. Yes. Yep.
What was the trick of a table?
The trick with the table or with the chair?
Is there, I mean, in terms of making a chair, what's the kind of challenge?
Well, over the years that I've been doing this as a hobby, one of the, I guess, claims to my interest is that I typically do not work with a plan. I've only made a few pieces using a very detailed plan, and I didn't really have a plan per se, other than dimensions for the pieces I made for St. Anne's, and that would include the chairs. But when you asked me to make the chairs, I explained to you that they were going to be very basic and functional. But so it was just coming up with the dimensions, I guess, and then coming up with a way to create a chair that would be functional and hold up over time.
Oh, I think the chairs you created are quite dignified. They're some of the nicest presiders' chairs I've seen, actually.
I'm glad you like it.
and part of that, Pat, is their simplicity. I mean, these are not things that should call attention to themselves, right, and draw attention away from the altar, for example,
right. That was one of the comments you made when we talked about making them, was that you didn't want them to be fancy because of that. You wanted them to be functional. Right, not to detract from the rest of the pieces on the altar.
Did we kind of borrow some for those chairs? Did we borrow some ideas from the chairs at St. Michael's?
I did. I took some measurements from the chairs over there. Yeah,
and the general design, the simplicity of that, I kind of think too, was similar to some chairs at Cathedral Parish in La Crosse. I had taken some pictures there. So those all, but you know, the thing about it, Pat, well, you were doing all those things and the church is being renovated and we're making choices of all these different floorings and wood, you know, the wood floor and the pews. So then the question is, so when Pat brings in these altar furnishings, are they going to complement the rest of the church? Because that was already done. So like that week before the bishop came is when you delivered the altar and stuff, right?
Yep.
Was it just that week?
Yes, it was.
And so I'm thinking, oh boy, how is this all going to fit together? Did that thought occur to you at all?
Well, obviously, I was hoping it was going to be complementary to everything else that went on in the church, but also I wanted something that would stand out as different, and I think that's one of the nice aspects about the black walnut material itself. It's not, like you mentioned a little bit ago, they're not typical oak or that kind of sturdy material. So it's quite an honor to think that those pieces will be decorating the church for years and years to come.
We sure hope so, right? Yes, exactly. And then the last piece that I called upon Pat to make was the ambry. So an ambry, and of course, he, like most Catholics, Pat didn't know what that was, right?
No.
So the ambry is the piece of furniture, the cabinet type thing, or that contains the holy oils, the chrism, the oil of the sick, and the oil of catechumens that are used to celebrate the various sacraments. The sacred chrism was used to consecrate the altar. So I think, Pat, you presented the sacred chrism at the dedication mass, correct?
I did, yes.
Yeah. And actually, if you go up there, Pat, and so then the bishop spread it around on the top of the altar.
I was a little nervous when that spreading it around was going on.
Why?
Well, I'd never I wasn't certain what how the polyacrylic finish on the altar would stand up to that oil, but I checked. I confess, I checked a couple of weeks later. I lifted the altar cloth, and it's held up fine.
and you can still smell the chrism.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, like so when I come in and venerate the altar at the beginning of Mass, I can smell that chrism every Sunday right after Mass, which again is kind of neat. Again, and I mean, if it was marble, let's say, you wouldn't smell
Right.
it like clean. So the ambo, so those sacred oil, the chrism, the oils go in the ambry, and so Pat created a really nice, beautiful, kind of again complementing the other altar pieces. But it's near the baptistry, which is where we primarily would use, especially the chrism for baptism, for example. And so it really complements well the containers we have for the oils. It just really looks nice. We might look at how we might do something with light or whatever there, but it really fits very well in that space. I mean, again, the proportions I think just are exactly what we'd want there. So
great.
Yeah. And then tell us Sue is your wife. Tell us what Sue's role was in this process, Pat, as it's unfolded.
Well, there were a couple of, Sue was always amazed that, that I spend as much time in my basement wood shop as I do. But on this particular project, she was very surprised at the amount of time it took to create each of the pieces. And I made the three, the altar, the ambo and the tabernacle table were all kind of the same project. And then you came along and asked me to make the credence table and the chairs as a follow-on project. But so Sue's very supportive and very encouraging and all of that. But at I think at the first Mass after the dedication, she noticed that the lectern that you use when you don't have a server.
Well, no, let's go back. Her first intervention, at least that I know of, was she thought the presider's chair should have a little shelf, or wasn't that her idea to put that little extension on there?
I think she came up with it first, and then when I asked you about it, you said, yeah, it would be nice to have a shelf on it. So that was another of those, okay, if we have to put a shelf on here, how will we incorporate that into this basic design? So we came up with with a functional shelf on the presider's chair. But she also made the comment that the cross behind the altar is a 12-foot long by 80-inch beam piece. And making that in my little wood shop in the basement was a bit of a challenge, especially when it needed to be moved. And she told me to suck it up. The good Lord carried it by himself. Get over it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that one.
So I did. I managed to move it around a couple of times without help, but getting it out of the basement required an extra couple of hands. But
I mean, that was a reality with a lot of these things, right, Pat? That
all of the pieces, we were able to carry all the pieces up from the basement without disassembling them, other than the altar. The altar we had to take apart and take up in, I guess, 6 pieces, and then assemble it in the garage before we brought it up to church. But at the first Mass, I think it was the first Mass after the dedication, she noticed that smaller lectern you use on the altar was made of oak and it didn't match. And so she's the one that motivated me, if you will, to make the piece that I brought over last week when I delivered the ambry.
Which I think Father Mashak used at a couple of the Masses this weekend when we didn't have servers to hold the book. That stand. What we need to come up with, Pat, for that is a clever name. The church has different words for like the ambry and the ambo. We need to come up with a name for that stand. So I'll ask somebody who knows Latin better to find a
I'm sure lectern's not the appropriate term.
No. It actually would be like book holder or something. I'll see what book holder is in Greek or Latin, and that's what we'll do. But I mean, to that point, ideally, Pat, we could put that into storage soon if we got if we had more servers,
right.
We wouldn't need that. But for the time being, it provides obviously a beautiful way to have that function of holding the Roman Missal for Mass.
Yes.
So, any other thoughts or comments that you'd want to share, Pat, about this project, about how it's turned out?
Oh, it was a privilege and an honor to be asked to do it, and very pleased with the results. And like I said a few minutes ago, it's rather awe-inspiring to think about how those pieces will be viewed by, by generations of people in the years to come. And who'd have thought, as I was tinkering in my wood shop as a kid, that one day I'd be involved in creating a church full of pieces like that. But
that's how the Spirit works, right? Well, thank you, Pat, very much again. I'm sure people who know you in the parish have acknowledged their admiration and their gratitude, and now more will know. But we're very grateful. We're grateful every Sunday when we come to Mass for those important pieces that you've made and that enhance our worship, and will do so for many years. So thank you, Pat, for being part of this conversation. I'm going to conclude with a prayer. This is the week of prayer for Christian unity. It goes up until January 25th, which is the feast of the conversion of St. Paul. This comes from the Wisconsin Council of Churches. Compassionate God, help us repair the harm that we have inflicted upon each other and the divisions we have created among your people. Just as Christ Jesus breathed the Holy Spirit onto the disciples to birth the community of the new creation, send your grace to heal our divisions and gift us with the unity for which Jesus prayed. Teach us and show us the way. Christ, the way, the truth, and the life, you embodied justice in your ministry on earth by the good that you did, breaking down the walls that divide and the prejudices that imprison. Open our hearts and minds to recognize that though we are many, we are one in you. Teach us and show us the way. Amen.